Hello everyone. In this video and some upcoming videos, I'm going to be talking about servlets, JSPs, and maybe about JSTL as well. So first, what's the need of servlets? But before that, something about CGIs. In early days of networking and internet, like in the early 90s, there was a technique called CGI, which stands for Common Gateway Interface. I'm sure many of you must have heard the term. Well, what CGI was is that in a client-server architecture, you would write any program on your computer. With the help of CGI, you would be able to run that program over the network. Like the client would request something, and that something may be generated as an output of the program and then sent over the network to the client. Then the question is, why servlets and JSPs? Well, the answer lies in how CGI worked. How that happens is there's an HTTP server which handles all the client requests. Whenever a request comes for a CGI script, it spawns an OS shell corresponding to that CGI program. Simply put, a shell is a program that takes some user input and provides that to the operating system for processing. In that way, it provides interface to use operating system services. For understanding purpose, think of the CGI script as a C program. Then the OS shell would be an executable process corresponding to that program. That process generates some output, and then that output is sent by the server over the network and to the client. Now, to illustrate some advantages and some disadvantages of this architecture, let us take an example. Suppose there are two CGI programs residing on the server. One is a C program and other is a Linux shell script. And then there are three clients, out of which two are requesting for the same C program and one is requesting for the shell script. Now, for the two clients requesting for the C program to be executed, two different shells will be spawned, one for each request. And for the client requesting the other one, a separate shell will be spawned. Now this example shows some advantages as well as some disadvantages of using CGI. First advantage would be that on the same server, you could have different CGI programs written in different languages, and then they would run because they are running on different processes, so no issue in that. The other advantage would be that even for the same CGI program as in the first case here, there will be no concurrency issues among them because for each new request it is served by spawning a new shell, so they can run simultaneously and there will be no issue in that. Now coming to the disadvantages. Spawning a new shell every time is a CPU intensive task, and then this shell will be using resources like hell. Because of this factor, a server can't serve many requests at the same time. Also, CGI has to generate some HTML response along with the code logic. So here, suppose I am a programmer writing a CGI script to fetch some data from a file. Along with writing the logic for that, I also have to write the code for HTML. So there is no clear boundary between different jobs. In this case, a programmer's job would be writing program for fetching of data, and a designer's job would be that how to present it effectively, which are two completely different jobs. But the same person writing the CGI script here has to do both the jobs. So how to overcome these problems? What if there's some way that instead of creating a new process every time, we can create a new thread for every request? Well, that's what servlets do. They convert each new request into a thread. Less CPU intensive task, right? And then about creating a distinction between business logic and presentation logic. Well, JSP is there to provide that. Now I'll start with servlets. JSPs, I'll describe about that in another video. About servlet architecture, this is the basic in its broader sense. I would be explaining about this architecture in much more detail in the next video. Nevertheless, this web server, as in the case of CGI, it handles all the client requests, but here inside the server there is a web container. Now a web container, it would be the software component of the server which provide runtime environment for the servlets to run. It handles everything from creating the servlet objects to destroying those objects and everything. Explanation about jobs of web container in later videos. Now working of servlet. There are these different clients, each one requesting for some servlet resource. When the request comes, web server checks if the request is valid or not, and then delegates it to the web container. When the first time a servlet is requested, web container loads that servlet in its memory and then spawns a thread corresponding to that servlet. A thread would be this lightweight thing in between, and then that thread serves the client for other requests for the same servlet. As it's already in memory, only a separate thread is created to serve that request. When the work is done by the servlet, it handles the response to the web server. The web server generates a HTML page corresponding to that response, because the response would be in the form of a Java object. Web server just generates HTML output from that Java object and then sends it to the client over the network. Advantages. Firstly, use of threads results in lightweight processing of requests. Secondly, scalability, because much more requests can be served by the servlet when compared to CGIs. Third, as it's written in Java, it will be platform independent obviously. But there are some disadvantages of servlets, as these different threads would be working on the same servlet object, so there would be some sharing of data, thus some concurrency issues which needs to be handled by the programmer. Secondly, like CGIs, there is no clear distinction of code logic versus presentation logic in servlet. Well, JSP overcomes that disadvantage. Well, that's all for this video. I hope it's clear now why servlets came into existence. Thanks for watching.